crafters and Scrappy Tails fans. My name is Deepa from DeeZinesByD, and today I have a Scrappy Tails post for you. So my card today is actually very simple. I'm used to making cards that take a lot of time. I'll have a lot of die cuts and different elements to it, but I wanted to keep this one simple for you. I'm using the new Spring Birds and Bloom stamp set, and I'm just going to be doing some watercoloring with this set. So as you can see, this set is gorgeous. You've got a bunch of florals, some cute little birds, a birdhouse if you want, and there's one image with a little nest. Now, if you look at the other set, so this is the Heartfelt Wing set, you can see the lines on it are much thicker. Sorry, they're much thicker. And the set that I'm going to be using has thinner lines, which I thought would look perfect and elegant for watercoloring. Now, I'm just using some cold pressed watercolor paper, and I've cut it down to slightly smaller than an A2 size piece of cardstock. So that is 5.5 by 4.25. So it's a little bit smaller. I'd say about a quarter of an inch smaller on both edges. And I'm using this little stamp set with the bird with the nest. Now, I originally picked this image because I have three daughters and there's three eggs in the nest, and my last name is Robbins, through marriage. And I thought this was a cute little robin with three little robin eggs, just like I have. But later on, I kind of changed up the color of the bird so it doesn't actually look like a robin. But yeah, that was basically why I chose this stamp, and I thought it fit perfectly for me. Now, I've used some VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink here. This ink is perfect for watercoloring, and you just stamp it out. Ensure that it's dry. You can wait for it to dry or use a heat tool to set it. Now, I did decide I wanted to add this little birdhouse on coming off of the edge. Now, I'm not stamping the actual birdhouse, but just the little bush there, just so that there's another branch coming inward so that you kind of look more at the bird and the eggs versus just a look at the leaves and your eyes drawn off the page. Now, I've used the sentiment that I'm going to be using from the same stamp set to kind of figure out where I want this branch to go. And then I'm just going to add ink to the branch where I want to stamp and stamp that out. Now, you'll see that I chose this birdhouse mainly because or the stamp with the birdhouse because it has the same type of flowers as the branch that I've used with the bird. So as I mentioned, I'm going to go ahead and just hit this with my heat tool. Sometimes, I mean, I've never had any running, but I always just want to make sure that if I'm doing something that takes time like watercoloring, that I've really heat set that ink so that there's no issues. Now, I have this cutting board here, which I use for watercoloring. It's just something I picked up at the dollar store. And I'm using my washi to just adhere this panel to the cutting board. Now, normally I would tape along the edges if I wanted a white edge, but I'm not doing that this time. I'm going to be using the Altenew 36 pan set watercolors along with these paintbrushes. These are just ones I've gotten off of Amazon. Now, I have round tip brushes, and then I've also got this black brush, which is a much thinner brush. The thin brushes are perfect for these images because, as I mentioned, they're fine and they're detailed, and the thinner brushes they're perfect for this. Now, for the technique I'm going to be using today, I'm not going to do just plain watercoloring. Like usually you'll add your water to the area that you want to paint, and then you'll just kind of drop in your colors, and the water just disperses those colors and mixes two different tones and stuff like that nicely. I wanted to try something a little different. So there is an art form or an art technique, pointillism. They use stippling, and with stippling all you're doing is making a bunch of little dots. So for me, I thought, I'm not great at watercoloring at all. I'm very new to it. I'm still learning, and I thought with the stippling effect I don't really have to worry too much about shadows and which parts are going to be darker or lighter and things like that. I just kind of do a whole bunch of little dots, and they all end up looking artistically nice at the end. So I thought this was a great technique to share with you, especially if you're a beginner like myself. Okay, so I've started off with the eggs here, and as you can see, I'm starting with Caribbean Sky. So the Caribbean Sky is a really nice light blue. And the other blue, I think it's Persian blue that I'm using to add darker areas, just darker little dots. All I'm doing is I'm just taking my brush and I'm going dot, 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 dot along the edges just to fill in the color. Now I'm coming in with espresso and paper bag to add my color in little dots along the You can see here, I do use the palette to do a bit of mixing. So the one thing that I'm gonna mention here is that when you're doing this technique, you don't want a really wet brush. You want your brush to be almost dry. So I'm only adding a bit of water just to activate my watercolors. And once my watercolor's activated, I take the ink on the brush, and as I showed you on the palette, I'm dabbing some of that ink off just so that it's less watery and my brush is a bit drier. That way, when you come to your cardstock with your paintbrush, you're going to actually see the little dots you're making. If your paintbrush has too much water in it, that water is just going to disperse on your cardstock and you're not going to see those dots. And then if you come in with another color, it's just going to mix like normal watercoloring. So I think the key to this technique is to have a drier brush. And I think when you're learning, that really comes in handy because when you're used to doing watercoloring, you kind of have to see where the water is going to go, where the colors are going to mix a bit ahead of time. And unless you've been watercoloring for a while, that's sometimes hard to do. Something you have to experiment with to get the hang of it, right? But for this, it's pretty much like coloring. So if I were to take I could probably do this whole technique with markers too. I could just take the marker and do the stippling effect and just, make little dots on this side and that side and then add darker dots for, a variation of color in different areas. This would completely work with markers as well if you don't want to use watercolors. So when you think about it like that, it makes a little bit more sense. So you want your brush just more saturated with color and less with water. And that's how you get that stippling effect. Now, as you can see, I don't even know where I'm putting the darker or the lighter color. I'm just going with the flow. And you get that effect of the shades and the highlights without even doing too much thinking. And that's what I love about this. I was just in a mood when I did this when I did this card whereby I didn't want to think at all. I just wanted to paint and I wanted to have fun, and this is just a great technique for that. Now, for the flowers, I'm coming in with, I think I've got cotton candy there, and then the darker pink is, I can't remember. Sorry, it's one of the darker pinks in the set. I think there's like two of them, and this is one. If you know the Altenew sets, the inks or the names of the inks and the watercolors are the same and the colors match up, which is really nice. I'm usually familiar with all of the names, but I'm just drawing a blank today. But yeah, all you really need is one of the darker pinks and one of the lighter ones, or you could choose a different color altogether. And as long as you have a dark and a light, and maybe if you want for more variation, add a third tone in there, this basically comes to life. Just dot, dot, dot all over the place, I did try and follow a little bit more of shading guidelines. So I've kind of made the center of the flowers a bit darker and just one edge of the flower petals so that you have a bit of like a dark and a light area. But I mean, you probably don't have to do that and you can still get the same effect. Now, as you can see, the flowers have a bit more area than say those eggs or the nest. So, you might want to use a third tone. I am going to bring in a third tone here. I'm going to bring in purple wine, and then I'm just going to add little bits. You're probably not going to see too much of it. Just little bits to the center and the edges just to add another color tone and so that the flowers stand out a little bit more. So I'm just going to go in and add some more some more watercolor to those flowers on the right side. And as you can see here, I'm coming in with that purple wine. It's just like a tiny bit that I'm adding. It doesn't make a huge difference, but you do see that third tone of color that just is a little bit more pleasing to the eye, especially when you have a larger area. So what I tend to do is the same thing with Copic coloring. If I have, say, leaves or something I'm coloring in that's a little smaller, I'll only use two colors. If it's a bigger or a larger area, I'll go ahead and add 3, maybe 4, depending on how much space I have within the lines for whatever that image is. Now you can see with this technique that I do have a bit of white, like there's a lot of white kind of showing through, not so much in the nest and the eggs, but with the flowers, there's lots of little white areas. If you don't like that look, that's completely fine. What you can do instead is maybe go over your image So for example, I'm watercoloring one flower. I'll go into that flower with just the lightest color and I'll just paint the entire flower lightly like you would normally with watercolor. I'll let that dry completely and then I'll come in with the drier brush and do the stippling. And then when you're doing your stippling over top, the color underneath, even if you don't get the stippling in that area, you're still going to see the pink, but it's the lighter pink. So I've tried to kind of speed up this portion because it's becoming a bit monotonous. You get the idea, right? So we're just putting a whole bunch of dots all over the place in terms of where you would expect more shadows to be or highlights. And as I said, you don't have to do that if you don't want to, and it's still going to end up looking pretty nice. And for now, for the leaves, I'm using some evergreen, some frayed leaf, and then some forest glades just to add those three tones because, again, the leaves take up a bigger area. So what happened was when I got to this stage, I thought, I've got a lot of bright colors here and this card's going to be a little bit more subdued. So I don't know if I wanted to make that bird a robin because a robin, it has like a nice bright orangey reddish chest, but then the rest of the leaves are like a brown or like blackish color. So I thought, maybe I want to just add a bit more color. And then I asked my daughters what they thought, and they wanted the bird to be more blue versus the robin color. So we went ahead and made it blue. Okay, so now we've got everything pretty much colored in except the little bird. I'm going to be using some of the Mountain Mist as my lightest blue, Lagoon as the mid-tone, and then I've got Desert Night as my darkest tone. So the portion where the head is, I'm going to keep that lighter. I'm going to keep the breast like a mid-tone, and then I'll make the actual wings and the tail a bit darker, along with that little strip that's on its head there. And then I'm going to add a bit of, I don't even remember which orange it is, but there's like a couple oranges in the set. I'm adding orange and then the fresh lemon to make up the beak and the feet. So I'm just going to go ahead and finish stippling this cute little bird here. And what I found is that you can also take those colors and mix them like you would do for normal watercoloring if you're not getting the colors that you want. So I did do a bit of mixing of the Desert Night with the lagoon color to get an in-between color there. And when you're stippling, the colors mix slightly, especially if you're not letting one layer dry until you use the next layer. If you want more of that dotted stippling effect, I do recommend making sure that your first layer of stippling is dry before you add the next. So I am just going to keep this really simple here. Now that I've got everything painted in, I just want to do a simple wash on the background. Now, if you're not familiar with how to do a wash or you're not confident in doing a wash, the best thing I could say to practice is to use a lighter color, and that's exactly what I'm doing here. So the first thing you want to do is just take your paintbrush. As you can see, I've switched to a larger round paintbrush for this, and I just add plain water to the top portion in strokes back and forth. And then I'll add some of the color to it. So it'll start picking up the color at the top, and then all you have to do is take some more water, just plain water on your brush, and then drag that color down. And when you use a lighter color like this, it's a lot more forgiving. So you can see that I'm able to kind of go in and around the images just to make sure that I'm coloring or adding color to all of the white in the background there. And since my card has the images mainly in the center, I started the wash at the top and I came downwards. And then what I'm going to do is the same thing at the bottom, start the wash at the bottom and then come upwards. So I've already done the wash at the bottom. Okay, I skipped over that because we already showed you at the top. I already showed you that from the top. And now I'm actually taking the this is the Persian blue again. And I'm just adding a little bit of that to the top and the bottom edge just to darken it up a bit. Because I thought that that Caribbean sky, you can hardly see it on the paper here. You do see it in the end. But for this, I wanted to really just darken up the top and the bottom edge. And I feel like that just gives it a nicer look and it pulls your eye in towards the center of the card. Then once you've had a bit of practice with doing washes, watercolor washes like this, you can go ahead and practice with darker colors. And there is like a chance to kind of screw up, but there's always a chance to fix it with watercolors because water will always reactivate your ink. Will reactivate your paint and allow you to kind of fix any mistakes you might have. So you can see I'm just adding some extra color along the edges here as well. And I'm pretty much done with my wash. So now I'll move on to the next step. You could let this dry overnight if you have time. I wanted to finish my video here, so I went ahead and I just hit it with my heat tool to make sure all of it's dry. The trick to this is just make sure you heat it on the back equally as you do on the front, and that way it's not going to warp too much. So now my panel's completely dry and I'm going to go ahead and add that sentiment. Now I could have added the sentiment in the beginning, but I didn't want it to kind of get lost in the wash. So I've left it here till the end. And this way, once I've added all my color, I can also decide whether I want to put it somewhere else if I want. So I've lined it up. I'm using the same VersaFine Clear Nocturne ink to stamp it out, and I've done it in my Misty again. I like when I'm using watercolor paper because it has that extra texture to it to use my Misty, just in case when I stamp the first time, I don't get a complete impression. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut out my card base. I'm just cutting an 8.5 by 11 piece of cardstock, white cardstock, in half. So I'm cutting at the 5.5 mark. This is to make a sideways or side folding card. I scored it at 4.25 and I've just strengthened my score line there with, that's not actually, that's the scoring tool. I don't even have a bone folder. Can you believe? I should actually invest in one at this point. But anyways, I did, I always wondered what a bone folder was good for. And I just found out in one of the videos that I watched recently that the bone folder, the Teflon bone folder, is good because when you run it across your card base, it doesn't leave like a shiny mark on it. And I didn't realize that was the reason why. So that's why a bone folder, especially its Teflon bone folder, is great. And now that I know the reason, I'll probably go and buy one because before I had no idea. Can you believe it? Anyways, so moving on, as you can see, I've got this rose gold shiny washi tape. So this is the more inexpensive way to add borders to your cards. You could use a specialty cardstock and cut it down, and then I tend to cut out the center because all of that gets covered by the panel that you're putting on top so that I'm not wasting it. But specialty cardstock does cost a bit of money. So this is some washi tape that I got off of Amazon. It's not that expensive at all. And then all I do is kind of just put it along the edges of my card. And yeah, then I get my border and I put my panel on top. So that's exactly what I'm doing here. I'm using a bit of strong double-sided adhesive here just because this is a watercolor panel. I had a little bit of warping, so I just want to make sure that it sits on my card base nice and flat. I use some tape runner for the center of the card. I place the panel on where I think I want it. Once I see that it's perfect, then I kind of reach in behind and I pull away all of that release paper from the strong double-sided adhesive, and that panel's going nowhere. Now for my embellishments, I cannot leave this alone. It probably would have been nice just like this, but I needed to add something shiny. So I've got these, I think these are like blue pearls, and they are from the Scrappy Tails shop. As I've mentioned before, they have tons of embellishments now, which I love. And this is one of them. I thought that the blue just went perfectly with the eggs. And coincidentally, yes, the background too. So I didn't want to take away too much from the bird, but I did want it to add a little bit of shine. And that is my card inspiration for today. So I hope that you have been inspired to create something similar yourself. Maybe you'll have a takeaway from this and use stippling on your projects, whether it's with watercolors like myself or with markers or some other medium that you may have. I hope you guys have a great day, and don't forget to check out the Scrappy Tails store. I have a link in the description below. All of the supplies I've used are within my blog, linked in the description below as well. If you liked my video, please don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell for future videos, and I'll see you guys again next time. Bye.